Have you ever just stopped and wondered what really makes you, well, you? Why you have certain habits, or fears, or dreams? These aren't just late night dorm room questions. They are the actual business of psychology, the science that's dedicated to unraveling the incredibly complex thing that is the human mind. And today, we're going to dive right into its fascinating story. So here's our game plan. We're going to start with the absolute basics. What even is psychology? Then we'll hop in the time machine and meet the pioneers, see the huge debates that shape the field, and then bring it all back to today to see how it's evolved and where psychology is at work in pretty much every part of our lives. All right, let's kick things off. Section 1, what is psychology? Because, when we say that word, what are we really talking about? This isn't just about thinking deep thoughts. It's a real science. And to get it, we need to look at the kinds of puzzles it tries to solve. Think about this for a second. There was a musician named Clive Wearing. A terrible infection completely wiped out his ability to form new memories. He couldn't remember what he had for breakfast 5 minutes ago. And yet, he could sit down at a piano and play a breathtakingly complex piece without a single mistake. How is that even possible? Psychology tackles these bizarre, profound, and deeply human questions. The definition is actually hidden right there in the word itself. It comes from the Greek words psyche, which means soul or mind, and ology, which means the scientific study of something. But the real game changer, the thing that turned this from philosophy into its own field, was that one word, scientific. That changed absolutely everything. And this is why. This is what makes psychology a science and not just a collection of interesting ideas. It's an empirical science, which is a fancy way of saying it's all based on evidence and the scientific method. Psychologists don't just come up with theories. They have to form a testable hypothesis, run experiments to test it, and build our understanding based on real, observable data. It's all about evidence, not just opinion. For the longest time, thinking about the mind was a job for philosophers. But back in the late 1800s, that all started to change, thanks to a few pioneers who were the first to bring the mind out of the armchair and into the laboratory. And right out of the gate, there was a big debate. On one side, you had a group called the structuralists. They wanted to create, a periodic table of the mind. Their idea was to break down consciousness into its tiniest little building blocks, using a method called introspection. Basically, they'd have people describe their own thoughts and feelings in detail. But another group, the functionalists, came along and said, whoa, hold on. Who cares what it's made of? The real question is, what does the mind do? How do our thoughts and behaviors help us survive and function in the world? And here are the two main guys behind those big ideas. On the left, we've got Wilhelm Wundt. He's the one who set up the very first psychology lab ever and was the biggest cheerleader for structuralism. And on the right, you've got William James, the first American psychologist. He was the champion of functionalism, always focused on how the mind helps us operate in the real world. But that early debate was just the warm-up act. The 20th century saw this explosion of new, competing ideas about what really makes us tick, and it led to some absolutely fascinating arguments that shaped the whole field. And then this guy enters the scene, Sigmund Freud. He came along with this totally revolutionary idea. He said that our conscious mind, the part we're aware of, is really just the tip of the iceberg. And underneath the surface is this deep, dark, hidden world, the unconscious mind, filled with feelings and urges, mostly from our childhood, that are secretly driving almost everything we do. Well, not everyone was buying what Freud was selling. A whole new group of psychologists, led by people like John B. Watson, basically said, hold on, the unconscious mind? We can't see it, we can't measure it. That's not science. And so, behaviorism was born. Their argument was that psychology should only study what we can directly see and measure, behavior. The mind itself, they called it a black box and said it was completely off limits for scientific study. So now we have a third voice jumping into the debate. Humanists, like Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers, looked at both of these camps and felt like they were both missing something huge. They thought Freud's view was way too pessimistic and that behaviorism was just too simplistic. So they rejected both of those ideas and instead focused on our innate potential for good, our ability to choose our own path, and our deep-seated drive to become the best versions of ourselves. Now, it's absolutely crucial to remember that for a long time, the main voices in psychology were almost all white men. But so many pioneers on the margins were doing incredible, history-changing work. Just look at Mamie and Kenneth Clark. They conducted this groundbreaking research on how segregation was affecting the self-esteem of African American kids. They used dolls to show that these children were developing a preference for white dolls, and their research became key evidence in the landmark Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court case, which helped end school segregation in the U.S. It just goes to show how powerful psychology can be in actually changing the world. So for decades, thanks to behaviorism, the study of the mind itself, thoughts, feelings, perceptions, was kind of pushed to the side. But that was all about to change in a big, big way. In the 1950s, thanks to new fields like computer science and linguistics, there was this massive shift. Thinkers like Noam Chomsky basically argued that behaviorism was way too short-sighted and that you couldn't possibly understand people without studying their thoughts. And just like that, the mind came roaring back to the center of psychology. This was the cognitive revolution. And that revolution just blew the doors wide open. Today, psychology is this incredibly diverse landscape. The American Psychological Association, which is the main professional organization, has 54 different divisions. You've got biopsychologists trying to map how our brains literally create our thoughts, social psychologists studying why we behave differently in groups, and forensic psychologists who apply all this stuff to the legal system. The field has just completely exploded. Let's just zoom in on one of those areas for a second: personality psychology. This field tries to figure out the consistent patterns of thought and behavior that make each of us unique. You've probably heard of the Big Five model. It's this popular idea that a lot of our personality can be described along 5 key dimensions: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. It's a perfect example of how modern psychology tries to measure and categorize the human experience. Okay, so we've got all these different kinds of psychologists. But what do they actually do all day? Well, the answer is a whole lot more than you might think. The applications go way, way beyond the therapist's couch. So let's look at where people with doctorates in psychology actually work. Yeah, about a quarter are at universities and another quarter are in hospitals, which is probably what you'd expect. But look at the rest. A big chunk work for the government or in business and nonprofits. It just shows you that understanding human behavior is a super valuable skill pretty much everywhere. And this right here might just be the most surprising part. You don't actually need a doctorate for a psychology degree to be incredibly useful. For people who graduate with just a bachelor's in psychology, the #1 job they go into is management. Why? It makes perfect sense when you think about it. Studying psychology teaches you how to think critically, how to really understand what motivates people, and how to evaluate information. All skills that are absolutely essential if you're going to lead a team. So this whole journey from philosophy to a full-blown science has been complicated. The field has had to face its own biases, and it's made some incredible leaps forward that have profoundly changed how we understand ourselves and how we can improve people's lives. So we've gone from asking, what is the soul, all the way to mapping brain activity and personality traits. But huge questions are still out there. Is it consciousness? Creativity? Where do our memories really live? After all this progress, what part of our own minds still feels like the biggest, most exciting mystery left to solve?